So, welcome everybody. This is the fourth lecture in my series on purification, ethics, and karma in early Buddhist discourse. Now we first look at the material we have covered last time. We had a look at three discourses in the Madhyama-āgama. Madhyama-āgama number 5, where we get all these comparisons, this very strong discourse. We had the Buddha asking the monks what is more pleasurable, embrace a girl or embrace a fire, and then 2 and 3 get homage or get one's limbs cut. Number 4 on receiving robes or the body being wrapped in a burning iron sheet. Number 5 to get tasty food or to have a burning iron ball put into one's mouth. Number 6 bedding or to be put on a hot iron bed. And number 7 getting a dwelling place or being put in a hot cauldron. There was a number of comments in the blog. The first one that I would like to share with you is by Laura de Bernardi on the Heap of Wood Discourse. So she says, I understood it as expressing the Buddha's disgust with hypocrisy, with the worst form of hypocrisy being someone who is pretending to live a holy life. Hypocrisy is a form of deceit, and I've heard it said that deceit and lying are behavior the Buddha strongly opposed. Thus the language of wickedness and evil to describe people who pretend to be something they are not. It's also fair to say that it is in general difficult to confront somebody who is acting hypocritically. So perhaps the discourse is also pointing to the strength of mind somebody must have in order to tackle a hypocrite, holy or otherwise. I thought that was very, very much to the point what Laura said. And as you know, I think I said before, to these Madhyama-āgama discourses, we do not have a commentarial tradition, but we have one for the Pāli discourses. So in the case of the parallel to this Madhyama-āgama discourse in the Anguttara Nikaya, we have a comment to this sutta, but it actually comes as the comment to another sutta that is according to the commentarial tradition related to that one. And you might remember that in the Pali version we got also the information that 600 monks had hot blood coming out of their mouths, whereas both discourses agree that 60 monks became arahants and 60 disrobed. Now the commentary gives us the following explanation. It says that those who became arahants on hearing this fiery discourse were monks that had a perfectly pure morality. But those monks who disrobed, that were those that were not really keeping the minor precepts so well. And those who had hot blood coming out of their mouth, they were parajikas. Parajika is the, we have 4 rules, parajika rules for monks. If as a bhikkhu I were to break any of these, I lose my status as a bhikkhu. I have to disrobe, and I cannot never ever become a bhikkhu again. But so I think that the point made by Laura is supported by the commentarial explanation we get for the Anguttara Nikaya version, in that the Buddha was really going for hypocrites, for monks who were pretending to be monks even though they did not deserve it, the parajikas, or for those who were acting as monks but were not really careful about the minor rules. But the commentary also gives us a happy ending for all of these. For the Arahants, there's no need to give you a happy ending, but it says that those who disrobed, these are the monks who did not care about the minor rules so much, and so they got so shocked by the Buddhist discourse that they disrobed and became laypersons. They nevertheless were so inspired that as lay people they practiced and they got some attainments or were at least reborn in a heavenly realm. And the commentary says the same also for those who had blood coming out of their mouth, which in brackets confirms my suggestion I made last time that this Indian notion of having blood coming out of one's mouth doesn't necessarily mean that somebody will then pass away. So these who had blood coming out of their mouth, they had to disrobe as monks, but then they had the option of reordaining as novices. And as novices, they also practiced very sternly, and they also got some attainment or rebirth in a heavenly realm. Yeah, then there is another comment. There any question on this point? I just want to check. No. Still with the heap of wood discourses. This is from Darshana Makavita. He says, in MA 5, it seems to me as if the first question on embracing the maiden is different from all the other 6. The difference here is that embracing a maiden while being a monk is an immoral deed, while the other 6 deeds are not immoral in itself, but are immoral if you are an immoral monk. I think that's a good point. And I believe Darshana is right that there is some degree of difference. But the way I read the discourse, and now that we know the commentary, it confirms this impression, is that immorality is implied throughout in all these 7 comparisons. And I think if we look at it again, then this may also help us to get to develop some perspective on the practical meaning that such a discourse may have for non-monastics. I mean, as Andrew pointed out last session, the implication that this discourse has for somebody like me is fairly evident, fairly obvious, but I think we can also make sense out of it from the perspective of somebody who is not depending on the offerings of others. The thing is, all these comparisons we get, the main point is that it is obviously more pleasurable to hug a girl than to hug a fire, or to put on nice robes or nice clothes instead of getting one's body wrapped in burning iron sheet, or to get nice food instead of getting a hot iron ball into one's mouth. But the point that I think the discourse is trying to make is a basic distinction between present experience and future experience. And this is something that I believe we can find frequently in the discourses. This advice, very basic, simple advice, in the present situation, if a decision is to be taken between something that is pleasant now and something that is not so pleasant or even painful now, the real question is not how do I feel about it now, but what's going to happen afterwards? What are the consequences of this? We find often in the discourses 4 ways of actions distinguished. Pleasant now, pleasant in future. Pleasant now, painful in future. Painful now, pleasant in future. Painful now, painful in future. So there's no categorical decision that one should at all costs avoid pleasure and just live in pain, or otherwise whatever is nice, that's the right way. But there's always this consideration of the future effects that one's action has, and I think that is a point that we can take from this discourse. I have quite a lot on this discourse. Maybe I'll stop again shortly if there's any question or comment on this. Don't see anybody typing, so I move on. This is a comment by One Room. She says, "It seems to me that in the Buddhist scripture, the number referring to those who listen to the Buddhist teachings, monks in this case, is always a round figure. What amazes me is that in the discourse on the heap of wood, the number of bhikkhus who got liberated from the fetters versus those..." Oh, there's something missing. Hang on. Oh no, there it is. "Who gave up precepts and returned home are equal in number, that is 60 each." Yeah, that is a very pertinent observation I found. Now, numbers. I think we need to keep in mind that in oral literature in general, there is a tendency for the stereotyping of numbers. This is not only specific to Buddhist discourses, but we have it in most oral literatures. And in Buddhist texts, we find this very typically with the number 5, the 5, one hand, 50, 500. So we often get this references to, especially like the Buddha is going anywhere, there will be 500 monks with him. So I think we shouldn't think that somebody has been counting them going, 490, 500 monks exactly. But it just means that there was a substantial group of monks with him. Then we have the number 7 very often for time periods. I discussed that already in my dissertation on Satipatthana. That's very interesting at the end of the Satipatthana discourse. There's a prediction when somebody, I simply said, if somebody practices properly, he or she can get non-return or full awakening. And this is possible if they practice for such and such a period of time. So the periods of time we get, and I found the same in the Chinese parallel in the Madhyama-āgama, is he could be practicing or she could be practicing 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months. You got the point. After 1 year, it doesn't go down 11 months, or 10, or 9, or 8, it goes 7. Again the same, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months. So the sequence of listing of time periods does not follow numerical logic. And I think again we shouldn't be getting too literal and say, oh, that means if after 7 months I didn't get it, I have to wait for 12 months because 8, 9 or 10 months are not mentioned. It's just that in general, in an oral literature, numbers have a strong tendency to be stereotyped and are sometimes not to be taken literal. We get the number 7 then multiplied by the 12 months of the year makes 84, and if we blow that up by 1,000 we get 84,000, and 84,000 is like the number in Buddhist discourses, also in later Buddhist texts, for saying just a lot, a long time, 84,000 years ago. It just means really a lot. The number 60, however, is not so often found. In fact, I am offhand not recalling other instances of precisely 60. And I mean, it's obviously makes us suspicious to see that 60 monks became arahants and 60 disrobed, and in the Pāli it's another 60 who have hot blood coming out of their mouths. But the number 60 is not one of those frequently stereotyped numbers. Yeah, I just thought it was nice to take up the point of numbers. This is all I have on reviewing Madhyama-āgama 5. If there's any comment or question on the heap of wood discourse, then now would be a good time to put that. Good, then Does this also apply to the number of heavenly and other worlds? A question by Robert. I think the heavenly and other worlds are usually not given as a number. We usually get reference to them by their name or by their proper name. The scholars question if the very detailed idea of heavenly worlds with all their subsections was already present at the time of early Buddhism. And there could be some signs that there had been a gradual development from a more simple presentation to a more detailed one. But this does not so much affect the issue of numbers. The issue of numbers is more something when a number by itself is mentioned in the text, such as the Buddha goes somewhere with 500 monks, or you do this, and after 7 days that happens, or after 7 years that happens, or 60 monks we had here in our discourse get this, and 60 monks happens, that happens. Yeah, good point. Yeah, then the next discourse, Madhyama-āgama 6, we looked at. There have been Manfred and Andrew and myself, we put on some more literature on this intermediate existence, on the different publications that are available. There's not much else that I want to add to that. Basically, we had this description of different non-returners compared to a splinter that flies off from a heated piece of iron and then cools down at different stages. And we saw that it seems that early Buddhism did envisage an intermediate form of existence, in quotation mark, between passing away and being reborn, even though the Theravada commentaries, the Theravada commentarial tradition does deny that and explains this otherwise. Yeah, and somebody who has fully realized that there is no further existence whatsoever. Then we come to the third discourse that we looked at. Was this discourse which was interesting insofar as it does not have a Pāli parallel. And it offers us a distinction between worldly merit. Worldly merit is when a son or daughter from a clan's family, from a good family, they offer a dwelling place, bedding, robes, food, attendance, make personal offerings, or protect the practice of the monks. And then Mahachunda, about whom we do not know so much from other discourses, asks for transcendental merit. And the Buddha expounds that transcendental merit is when one becomes inspired on hearing that the Tathagata or one of his disciples stays somewhere, or that they will come, or that they have come. And then one goes and meets them and pays respect to them, makes offerings to them, takes refuge, and takes the precepts. There's a number of comments on this. The first is by Michael Dove. Michael Dove says, the 7 transcendental qualities can be distinguished from the worldly ones, intention versus action. But they completely omit meditation. This seems strange. How you direct your intention is important, but calling it transcendental seems over the top compared with meditation. And here is Dania Percy. She's very active on the blog, lots of good points she makes. She says the 7 transcendental merits don't seem so deep. I don't see how those lead to liberation. And she asks if transcendental is something that leads to liberation. Yeah, that's the way I understand it. Transcendental would be, and we will come back to that a little later, would be the corresponding to Pāli Lokuttara. In the Chinese version, we get a character for out, going out of the world. And these transcendental merits, they are indeed rather basic. As Michael points out, there is nothing about meditation there. And we can only understand them as providing a basis for progress on the path, but not describing the actual progress on the path. And there is something more to intention in them, or being inspired, as Michael pointed out. See, the others are really doing things. And the first 3 are on inspiration. And there's a longer comment by One Room. She says, I think making offerings under the worldly merits category simply portray that this act of giving to monks is accustomed in the Indian culture in a way. So people give because everyone does so, without thinking much about it. Well, perhaps maybe because it's good to do so. In a way, this action is done habitually, so to speak, hence worldly merits. For transcendental merits, as listed in the sutta, the first 3 of the 7 has inspired, emphasizing the mental state itself is supreme enough to gain merits that exceeds those who gave actual things. Although the 4th mentioned meet and pay respect, and the 5th make offering, is still means that if the giver can get inspired merely by hearing the whereabouts of the Tathagata and his disciples, he or she must have a mental state that is already above the average. This could be due to meditation, to practice of good conduct, or to dispositions. Yeah, I thought that was a good point. Now comes a question that takes us a little bit away from this discourse, but is important enough that we should look at it now. And then, oh, there's one piece missing. So that is Linda Grace. And I want to look at this and then come back to the notion of transcendental or lokuttara. So Linda says, I've always been a little perplexed with the teachings on the merit of one's actions of generosity being partially determined by the worthiness of the recipient. Of course, I see the tremendous value in supporting the Sangha. I have edited out something here. But if one sees merit as the creation result of good karma, and karma depends on the intention of the person doing the action, I don't see how the type of recipient should be a prime determining force in the value of the merit. Of course, there's a positive intention in wanting to support the Sangha, for example, or someone wise or of high ethical behavior, but it seems to me the purity of mind intention of the giver is the key. And she gives an example. For example, someone giving food to a hungry stranger who may or may not be of high moral conduct on the street could conceivably give with a purer intention than someone else offering food to the Sangha. Yeah, I agree on the example. And I also agree that purity of the mind, intention of the giver is the key. And I would just say that I would change here. She says how the type of recipient should be the prime determining force in the value of the merit. I think it's not the prime determining force, but it is a determining force. And I would like to come back to the passage. I think I briefly mentioned that already. I hope you can see it here on the PDF from the Dakkhina-vibhanga-sutta, which speaks of 4 kinds of purification of offering, and this is already a first little point on our topic of purification, which we are going to get either today or next week. 4. The purification of offering can be by the giver, but not by the receiver, by the receiver, but not by the giver, by neither of the two, and by both. I think the principle that stands behind there is that, yes, Buddhism gives a central importance to intention, but no, intention is not the whole story. There has to also be wise consideration of the effects of what I do. In other words, I can't just do anything and completely blend out the rest of the situation. You see, as long as my intention is wholesome and correct, everything is fine. The rest of the world has to deal with whatever I do as long as my intention is wholesome. That doesn't work. And I have the little stupid example. If I work in the kitchen in a kindergarten, and after chopping up the food I leave the knife lying around, there need not be any negative or bad intention on my part, but I am still responsible for the little children damaging themselves by playing around with a sharp knife because I've been careless or I've been distracted. So I think in all our doings and deeds, there is the question of what is my intention in doing something? Why am I sitting here and talking to you? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? But there's also the question of having a clear comprehension, sampajanya, of the suitability of an action, of the way it will affect others, of the results it will have. And I think from that perspective we can understand why a purification of an offering can take place from both ends. It's not that the receiver is the prime importance, but it makes a difference. If you give a gift with the same degree of wholesomeness in your mind to different recipients, it makes a difference. So yes, somebody who gives, to come back to the example, to gives to a hungry stranger may have a purer mind than somebody who gives to an accomplished member of the Sangha. Then the purification of the giver is of different degrees, so that has an effect obviously, but the receiver is also of considerable relevance. After this little excursion, we're going to get more into karma soon, one of the topics of this course. I want to come back to the Lokuttara, the transcendental merit. This is from Andrea Feller. She observes, I have some thoughts and questions about Madhyama-āgama 7, the Discourse on Worldly Merit. In particular, I am interested in the term transcendent merit. This is not a term I am familiar with from the Pāli discourses. I find it interesting that this term is found in a Madhyama-āgama discourse that does not have a parallel in the Pāli canon. Might this point to Madhyama-āgama 7 being a slightly later text? I think yeah. The notion of something being transcendental or lokuttara is not so prominent in the early discourses. There's one example, I just paste in the reference for you, where I think it is early. That is in the Esukari-sutta. It's Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 96. So there's a Brahmin who comes to see the Buddha and wants to debate the caste question, the 4 classes in ancient Indian society and their respective duties. So he speaks of a person's wealth. Brahmin's wealth is this, and so he should only have this type of occupation, and warrior's wealth, kshatriya, is this type of wealth. And the Buddha gives a very pithy reply. I'll give it to you in English. I love the Pāli. I have to read the Pāli once. Ariyang lokutarang dhammang purisassa sandhanang panyapimi. I declare the noble supramundane Dhamma as a person's own wealth. This is a very, very, very poignant reply which directs this whole talk of castes and their respective wealth to the one thing that is really important, the Lokuttara Dharma, and this is a reference to Nirvana, the experience to Nirvana. That is the true wealth that, in a way, we all are. We don't have it right away, but we all stand a chance of having it. But then another occurrence of the Lokuttara notion can be found in the Mahācatārisaka-sutta, that is Majjhima Nikaya 117. Again, I give you the PTS reference there. And there's examination of the path factors. And the Pali version distinguishes several of the path factors into those that are Lokuttara and those that are not. So, for example, the right view we get, there is right view that is the opposite of wrong views. Right view affirms this and this and this and that. And then we get the Lokuttara right view, which is just the at the moment of the experience of awakening, this type of rightly seeing. And so the Mahācatārisaka-sutta, what it does is it gives two different path factors. It adds to the contrast between right and wrong. It adds this notion of a Lokuttara path factor, of a transcendental path factor, of a supramundane path factor, which is usually found in the Abhidharma. And I've done a study of this discourse. The article is just coming out. I still not out, so I can't share it with you right away. It seems very clear that this is a later addition to the discourse. This is one of the really substantial findings I made in my comparative study of the Majjhima Nikaya. We have a Chinese parallel in the Madhyama-āgama and a Tibetan parallel, Mula Savastivada version. They both do not have anything of these transcendental path factors. And when we look more closely at the description of these path factors, we find that it uses certain terminology that is Abhidharma terminology that is otherwise not found in the early discourses. So I think that a good argument can be made that in this case the Lokuttara idea is a later addition. And I believe that Andrea is also right when she says that in Madhyama-āgama 7 it is possible that this notion of transcendental merit is a later development. Now, I have one longer thing still to say. I think I just stop now and briefly see if there's any question on what I have said so far. There is something more on the lateness or otherwise of Madhyama-āgama 7 that I would like to say, but it might get too long. No comments? Good. Don't know if it's good or bad, but I go on. Now, at the end of the last lecture, I mentioned that in principle, when we do not have a parallel to a discourse at all, it is a little more difficult to come to a definite conclusion. I said that if we have two discourse parallels and we put them side by side and we see like they agree, but this part is different. It's here, but it's not there. Then we can definitely come to a conclusion. But in the case of just not having a parallel at all, it's a little more difficult. And I gave as example the case of the Jivaka Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, where some discussion has been, one scholar has developed the idea that this has a specific meaning, that we don't have a Chinese parallel, but then later on we found a parallel in the recently discovered Sanskrit fragments, so that whole argumentation collapses. Now, right away at the conclusion of the lecture, Linda was quick to point out to me that my nice point works for a Pali discourse that doesn't have a Chinese parallel, but for a Chinese parallel that doesn't have a Pali discourse doesn't work so well, because my argument had been based on the Chinese Agamas being from different schools. And I think Darshana also pointed that out on the blog. So that's correct. My argument made was mainly against this scholar who has drawn conclusions that certain discourses, we can make a general statement just based on the fact that there's no Chinese parallel. But I think that we can still put it the other way around and say that also in the case of a Chinese discourse that does not have a Pali parallel, it is not easy for us to immediately be able to dismiss that discourse. I think if we make an argument like we have developed now a little bit, that okay, the transcendental merit is something we don't really find in other discourses, and the notion of opposing worldly and transcendental is somewhat later, and so we get the impression this discourse might be a later teaching. I think that is a reasonable way to go about. But the mere fact, Madhyama-āgama 7, no Pali parallel, forget it. I don't think that works, because we have to take into account the fluidity of the transmission. And it's this I would like to go into a little bit more. Excuse me. As an extract here I have from a scholar named Davidson that I found very useful. I read it to you now. During the more than 40 years of the Buddha's teaching career, there were many monks acting as authoritative teachers of the doctrine throughout the kingdom of Magadha and its border areas. They would cross paths with the master from time to time and receive new information as his doctrine and teaching style developed. They would also receive new information from one another during the fortnightly congregations. He is referring to the recital of the Patimokkha, the summer rain retreats, and whenever they met as their mendicant paths crossed. After 40 years of their obtaining new information through such contact, we may be certain that, by the death of the Buddha, the process of receiving new teachers of the teacher had become a well-accepted practice. The network of instruction was thus established, and doubtless most of the monks realized that much of what the Buddha had said during his lengthy career remained unknown to them personally. I find this very helpful because it gives us a feeling of how fluctuating the situation would have been already at the Buddha's time. You can just imagine. I mean, there's nothing written, no fixed record, and all you get is either you are there when the Buddha gives the teaching, then you hear it and you can pass it on to others, or others tell you, look, a few weeks ago I met and this and that, and then he gave this and this discourse. And that fluidity and continuous growth, the Buddha keeps on giving discourses and discourses, that would have, I think, continued. Then we get the first communal recitation, also sometimes said to be a council, the Sangiti. And scholars are divided about the degree of historicity that we should accord to the traditional account. I personally think that it is not at all improbable that at the time when the Buddha had passed away, the monks gathered together, and that Ananda, who was the Buddha's personal attendant and who is in all tradition said to be one who literally has heard much, he had heard a lot of discourses and kept them in mind, that he would give them the latest version of what Davidson has so nicely described, of this fluid passing on of new discourses and new discourses. That this was a council that settled the canon for good, this is probably a later interpretation of what happened, that was only necessary, that only came into being at a time when different Buddhist groups separated and had disagreement on what is the original teaching. But the basic idea, the monks meet together, quite a number of monks. Ananda recites the discourses he knows, and so that there is a certain amount of like a gathering point of information. I think that is quite reasonable to think this is a quite may indeed have happened. And we find in the different Vinayas that report this first Sangiti, chanting together, Sangiti, communal recitation. All of them mention the four collections, but they always, most of them disagree on the sequence. Like some have the Samyukta as the first. In the Theravada tradition, we get first the Dirgha or the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses. So even the sequence of these four is not agreed on. And as we already saw in the first lecture, the contents can be quite different. But the basic idea of having four collections of discourses seems to be a shared factor. Now we get this nice incident in the Pāli Vinaya that I wanted to look at with you. It's here on the page after the first Sangiti. We get this episode where those who have just finished the Sangiti, they approach another monk by the name of Purana. And here I'm giving you a Horner's translation. So they say, Reverend or Venerable Purana, Dhamma and discipline have been chanted by monks who are elders. Submit yourself to this chanting. And Purana says, Your reverences or venerable ones, well chanted by the elders are Dhamma and discipline, but in that way that I heard it in the Lord's presence, that I received it in His presence, in that same way I will bear it in mind. Several scholars have pointed out that this is rather significant, that the traditional account of the first Sangiti ends with this note of discordance, and that it has not been taken out or erased by later generations. And so it is generally agreed that there must be something genuine in this episode, because one cannot imagine that this was just imagined, as it runs counter to the whole tendency of the narration of the first Sangiti. And I think it reminds us of the fact that not only what we had here before so nicely described by Davidson. During the time when the Buddha was still teaching, there was fluidity, but even at the very moment where, according to tradition, a fixed canon was set, there was already at that point there was fluidity. The Purana and his disciples would have remembered the teachings of the Buddha in a different way, in a different form from those elders that have been participating in the Sangiti, and we may expect that Purana maybe remembered some discourses the others did not, or the other way around. There's always considerable room for this fluidity, and we cannot posit any collection, the four Pāli Nikayas for example, as like this is the standard and everything else has to measure up against this. This is complete, this is all the discourses, and anything that falls out of that must be a later addition. And I think in keeping this fluidity in mind and looking after the principles, as we did above with those transcendental qualification of merits, we are keeping fully in line with the teaching given according to the Mahaparinibbana-sutta and its parallels by the Buddha on how on scriptural verification, on how to verify there are scriptures, or scriptures is the wrong word, suttas that were heard. These are the four great standards, the Mahapadesa. I'm using Walsh's translation. Suppose a monk were to say, "Friends, I heard and received this from the Lord's own lips. This is the Dhamma, this is the discipline, this is the Master's teaching." Then, monks, you should neither approve nor disapprove his words. Then, without approving or disapproving, his words and expressions should be carefully noted and compared with the suttas and reviewed in the light of the discipline. If they, on such comparison and review, are found not to conform to the suttas or the discipline, the conclusion must be, assuredly, this is not the word of the Buddha. It has been wrongly understood by this monk, and the matter is to be rejected. But where on such comparison and review they are found to conform to the suttas or the discipline, the conclusion must be, assuredly, this is the word of the Buddha. It has been rightly understood by this monk. The same basic pattern is then given to three other possible sources, where instead of hearing it from the Buddha itself, one may have heard it from a whole community of elders, from a group, many elders who are learned, or even from a single elder. This makes them four Mahapadesas, four great standards. And I think this is quite significant, that the point really, and this is what we have just now been doing with Madhyama-āgama 7, is to take a closer look at the discourse in question and see does it fit with the rest. This is what I was saying before about the Mahācattarisaka Sutta, where I find there's something here on supramundane path factors. We do not get supramundane path factors anywhere else in the Pāli Canon, and we look closer at it, we find that it uses terminology, terms that are found in the Abhidharma, not in other discourses, and then we find also the parallel versions don't have this. So then we can really be drawing a conclusion that this is probably a later addition. And I believe to some degree we can also be suspicious about our Madhyama-āgama 7, about these transcendental merits. Yeah, this was what I had from the blogs and from the last lecture. It's taken me a little while, but I thought it's important to touch on that topic of karma, and also to go a little bit into the transmission and the Sangiti, the first Sangiti. Now, at this point, I definitely have to catch my breath and ask for any questions or comments on what I've said so far. And after that, we will get into Madhyama-āgama 8. Then we go on. Yeah, maybe I clear the chat. The discourse we get now is, in a way, it's a gloss on anicca vata sankhara, on impermanent are all formations. This is according to tradition, were the words spoken by the god Sakka when the Buddha had passed away, and the last words that the Buddha is recorded to have spoken at that time was also on sankharas. Vaya dhamma sankhara, all sankharas are of a nature to pass away. The point of impermanence is central to Buddhist insight. It's the very basis of the development of insight in Buddhism. In fact, the faculty of wisdom in the discourses is standardly described as insight into impermanence. And the other interesting aspect is the word sankhara. In this discourse, the word sankhara, translated here as formation, is used in its very general sense. In the discourses, we find three main meanings of the term sankhara. One is as one of the five aggregates that make up what, according to early Buddhism, is the individual, body, feeling, perception, sankharas, and consciousness. And here sankharas stands for that part of our mind which reacts, the volition or intention. And in later Buddhist thought, this, I like to call it a clear-cut distinction into four main aspects with which one can identify as I, me, or myself, gets a little lost because the term sankhara becomes an umbrella term for any mental factor or quality that cannot easily be fit into the other aggregates. But in the early discourses, as the fourth of the five aggregates, sankhara really stands for volition. And the next big scheme where sankhara comes up is the chain of dependent arising, which is the explanation of the arising of dukkha by way of 12 links in the standard presentation. There are several interesting variations, but we will not get into that now. And here sankhara stands in position number 2. Based on ignorance, there are formations, conditionings, and based on such ignorant conditionings, then the whole chain continues up to the experience of dukkha. Again, this is just briefly, but now what we get is sankharas in their most general term. Sankhara, what makes together and what is made together. Anything conditioned, anything composite can be a sankhara. Even this computer in front of me is a sankhara, if you like. So we get on our teaching on impermanence and sankharas, just when Hedwig has to go. Discourse on seven suns, and this is the parallel to the Sattasūriya-sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. Thus have I heard. At one time the Buddha was staying at Vesali in Pāli's grove. At that time the Blessed One addressed the monks. All formations, these are our sankharas, all formations are impermanent, of a nature not to last, quickly changing by nature, unreliable by nature. Thus one should not delight in or be attached to formations. One should loathe them as troublesome. One should seek to abandon them. One should seek to be free from them. Why is that? There will be a time when it will not rain. At that time, when it does not rain, all the trees, the hundreds of cereals, and all medicinal shrubs will wither entirely, come to destruction and extinction, unable to continue existing. That is why I say that all formations are impermanent. The discourse continues by describing that different further stages in this Holocaust, one might almost want to call it. Next stage is a second sun appears. The flow of all the streams and rivulets will become exhausted. A third sun appears. All the great rivers will become exhausted. A fourth sun appears. The great springs from which the 5 rivers of Jambudvipa emerge. Jambudvipa refers to the Indian subcontinent. The Ganges being the first, the Yamuna the second, the Sarabhu the third, the Achiravati the fourth, and the Mahi the fifth. Those great springs will all become exhausted. And the 5th sun appears. The water of the great ocean will recede, until the water of the ocean will be completely exhausted, being not sufficient to submerge even one finger. I have considerably abbreviated this section. The description is very detailed. A 6th sun appears. The whole great earth, together with Mount Meru, king of mountains, will be totally submerged in smoke, a single mass of smoke. A 7th sun appears. The whole great earth, together with Meru, king of mountains, will be all ablaze, intensely hot, a single mass of flame. I have now told you that Meru, king of mountains, will collapse and be completely destroyed. Who can believe this? Only those who have seen the truth. This is the first part of the discourse, and the description of these 7 suns and their effect with some minor variations is similar in the Pali version. The discourse has a second section which is not immediately evident in what relation it stands to the first. But before I get to that again, I would like to give a moment opportunity for any questions or comments on this discourse. Manfred asks, how would that relate to me now when these things happen in the far future? Give the question back to the others. Anybody, any idea? Robert, the example shows that even things we take as completely granted, such as the earth, perish and wither eventually. Hence, what is the point of clinging to all the rest, which is obviously less stable and less permanent than the earth? Right. Excellent. Yeah, then I think I continue with the second part of the discourse. Monks, in ancient times there was a great teacher called Sunetta. When the great teacher Sunetta gave teachings about the way to the Brahma world, some of his disciples did not adequately put his teaching into practice. Excuse me. At the end of life, some of them were reborn among the four great kings. This is one of those heavenly realms that we talked about before. Some were reborn among the 33 gods. Some were reborn among the Yama gods. Some were reborn among the Tusita gods. Some were reborn among the gods who delight in creating. And some were reborn among the gods who delight in the creation of others. Excuse me. All these are realms of the sensual heaven. At that time, the great teacher Sunetta had this thought: in my next life, I should not be reborn in the same place as my disciples. I would now rather develop and cultivate loving kindness. Having developed and cultivated loving kindness, at the end of life he attained rebirth among the gods of radiance, the Abhasara Devaloka. Monks, what do you think? The great teacher in ancient times called Sunetta, do you think this was someone else? Do not think that. Know that it was me. This identification is not found in the Pali version. At that time, I personally practiced that path, which was of benefit to myself and of benefit to others, benefiting many people, out of compassion for the world, seeking the advantage and benefit of gods and human beings, seeking their peace and happiness. The teaching I gave at that time did not lead to the ultimate, was not the ultimate purity, not the ultimate holy life, and not the ultimate completion of the holy life. At that time I was not able to abandon birth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and distress. I was not able to attain complete liberation from suffering. But now, monks, I have appeared in the world as a Tathagata. The teaching I now give leads to the ultimate, is the ultimate purity, the ultimate completion of the holy life. I have now abandoned birth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and distress. I have now attained complete liberation from suffering. This is what the Buddha said. Having heard the Buddha's words, the monks were delighted and remembered them well. So I have summarized here the main points. I should mention that the Anguttara Nikaya version has a set of verses at the end of the discourses which are not found in the Madhyama-āgama. Anyway, the main points, so we get these 7 suns appearing one after the other, and the results is the first the trees dry up, then the rivulets, then the rivers, then the springs of the great rivers, then the water of the ocean, the earth is in smoke, and finally the earth is all ablaze on fire. And then in the second part of the discourse we get this contrast between Sunetta teaching the path to a heavenly rebirth, the practice of the divine abodes, especially loving kindness, leading to rebirth in the Brahma world, superior to those sensual realms in which his disciples were reborn. And on the other side, the Tathagata, the Buddha, who teaches the path to liberation. Yeah, any comments or questions on this discourse? Jan asked, was it Sunetta's idea to maintain higher than his students, or did he see that this way is not final? I think the idea that we get here is that Sunetta did not know anything better than practicing the Brahma Viharas and being reborn in the higher heavenly spheres. So he just saw that the way he was teaching, his students were not fully following that, and then he decided that he will, however, make the best of what he knew, and that would lead him to rebirth in the Brahma world. And in both versions, the Buddha contrasts this way of practice, which was already considered to be superior to his disciples, but only leads to rebirth in heaven, to the path to liberation. And Christopher asked, who is or was Sunetta? Well, all we know about Sunetta is this information we get in this discourse. And so the question really is, was he a past life of the Buddha or not? And if there are no further comments, then I would like to go into this topic a little bit more. Yeah, who was Sunetta? Christopher has actually very nicely pinpointed the issue. See that. Oh, there is another comment. Wait, Robert. Even though loving kindness alone does lead to liberation. Does not lead to liberation, yeah. However, developing it seems to be an essential aspect also along the path to liberation. A practical question to me is, how do I develop loving kindness? Yeah, that is a nice point that I like to. We still have some time. I have my last discussion on who was Sunetta. Put it aside for a moment. Yeah, loving kindness has a considerable contribution to make to the path to liberation, and that in particular for progress from stream entry to non-returning. There are several passages that tell us that metta, loving kindness, is bhavita bahulikata anagamitaya sangvatati, developed and made much of, leads to non-return. And the issue is that based on the first foundation of insight developed with stream entry, the clear understanding of impermanence, dukkha, and not self, the issue is that now ill will or anger and hatred on the one side and sensual desire on the other side have to be overcome. These are the two fetters that the stream enterer faces, and that for progress via one's return to non-return, he or she has to eradicate. And a loving kindness catches both in one go, if I may say that in this manner. The thing is that the experience of deeper happiness, we had a little discussion with Dania on Sukha on the blog, the experience of that inner spiritual happiness of a deep concentration divests sensual pleasures of their attraction. So any development, any successful development of mental tranquility by any meditation object will help to get out of sensual desire. If, and there is an if at first some degree of distance to sensual desire has been established. If somebody is still engaging in sensual pleasures and has a lot of sensual desire, then actually practicing any form of samatha, and particular loving kindness, may even make the situation worse, because there has to be a basis and a clear distinction between worthwhile objects of happiness and those who are not. But once somebody has attained stream entry and thereby experienced nirvana for the first time and gotten some distance to involvement with the sensual world, it can be expected that such a one, he or she, is able to develop loving kindness without this going over into a sensual attraction. And if that is possible, and deeper attainments are able, like the jhanas, that divest sensual pleasures of their attraction, then the fact that loving kindness has been used for this purpose has the additional effect that by developing loving kindness, I am countering anger and ill will. These two states are naturally opposed, so the more somebody develops loving kindness, the more the contrary quality of ill will or hatred will be diminished. So in this way, loving kindness as a formal meditation practice and as a form of interrelating with others becomes particularly useful for progress from stream entry to non-return. And the question how to develop loving kindness is also of considerable interest, because Manfred puts in that Suneta could not have been a non-returner. Yeah, definitely. I'm not talking about Suneta. I'm just talking in general about the question of loving kindness and its relation to liberation. Good that you pointed that out. So I'm not meaning Suneta. I've left Suneta in the past where he belongs, and we'll come back to who he is or was in about another 2-3 minutes. But at present, I'm just talking about loving kindness in general. Yeah, how to develop loving kindness, and there is this is one of the points that really make me an advocate of study of the early discourses, because the way loving kindness meditation is taught in the commentaries seems to me to be considerably different. There we get a practice of directing thoughts of goodwill to a friend, a neutral person, an enemy. This whole approach is nowhere described in the early discourses. There's nothing about friend or myself, friend, neutral, enemy. All this is not found at all. What we get there is a development of the basic attitude of loving kindness within the heart, and then spreading it in all directions without making any distinctions. This is a somewhat huge topic I'm getting into now that I think I have to cut down now. I'm planning to write a book on loving kindness at some point in the future, because I find this so important, and to introduce the way it's practiced in the suttas. And that is also the way how I practice it myself. I have found some find the commentarial instructions very useful, and I do not want to speak against that, but there are others who do not, and I'm one of those. And I find that the basic idea of not getting into any kind of intellectualizations in terms of words directed to particular persons, but instead developing that basic attitude and then just radiating it out in all directions can become a very powerful practice. Andrew asked when I will be writing that book on loving kindness. That'll be a couple of years from now, because I have so many other things on my back. Yeah, now I want to come back to Christopher's who was Suneta. As we saw in the Pali version, he's not identified. In the Madhyama-āgama version, we are told he is a past life of the Buddha. There's quite a number of such issues, of such cases. I have made a study of them as part of my book on the genesis of the Bodhisattva idea. This book was published last year, and you can download a PDF file from the webpage of the Center for Buddhist Studies, where you enrolled for this course under publications. And it's in the second chapter. Let me just see. This is the book. It's in the second chapter, so I'm drawing on that. You will get more references there. Anyway, there is a few cases that I would like to go through now. The first is, and I have put them here on the blackboard, it's a discourse in the Samyutta Nikaya, has a parallel in the Samyutta-āgama, preserved in Chinese. And it gives us a tale. The Buddha gives a tale. The idea of his teaching is to tell the listeners that Satipatthana, the practice of mindfulness, is something to which one should stick. This is one's proper resort. And if one gets out of that resort, getting involved in sensual pleasures, then one can easily become a victim of Mara. And to illustrate this teaching, we get this story of a quail and a falcon. I hope my pronunciation is okay for those of you who are native speakers. So this quail lives on freshly plowed land. He always goes around to pick out his food among the pieces of earth that have been turned up by the plow. And so one day the quail thinks, well, let me just see over there by the forest if there's something nice. As soon as he leaves his proper ground, goes to the forest, he's caught by a falcon or a hawk, whatever. Now, as he's caught by the falcon, the quail goes, I should not have left my proper resort, my home grounds. If I would have stayed in my home grounds, no way this falcon could have gotten me. He would have stood any chance against me. So the falcon is caught by his pride and says, what? You think you can stand up against me? Let's have a try. You go. And he lets the quail go. And so the quail goes back onto the freshly plowed ground and stands on top of a very big clod of earth and starts shouting, hey you, falcon, come here, I'm ready, come. And the falcon gets really angry and he swoops down with full speed on the quail. And just the last moment, when he's about to catch the quail again, the quail jumps down behind the clod and the falcon hits his breast on the clod of earth and dies. So the parable is clearly meant to convey a teaching. The interesting thing is that in the discourses, this is obviously a parable, but in the Pāli Jataka collection, we are told this is a story of a past birth of the Buddha, who was the clever quail in this story, obviously. I'm giving you the references here just to the Pali versions if you like to check it up. If you like to get the references to any Chinese parallels that I mention as I go on, then you have to consult my book. We have another version of this tale also in a Chinese Udana collection, and there also is no identification of any of the animals as a past life of the Buddha. The next story I have, there are actually two stories. They are from the Pāli-sutta. This is an encounter between a Buddhist monk and a skeptic, and they have a really nice debate with each other, real ancient Indian debate. And in this debate, the Buddhist monk uses various examples or similes to illustrate his arguments. And so one of these illustrations he uses, it describes two caravan leaders as a group of 1,000, stereotype number, 1,000, two groups of 500 caravan members, and they have to go through a difficult part of the country, and so they decide to split up. One of them goes ahead with 500 and the other waits, because they say if we all travel together then water and support will be difficult to get, so you go ahead and we wait for a while and then we follow. And first of the two, then on the way they meet a yaka, like kind of ghost or goblin, who lies to them. He tells them, look, there's water ahead, you can throw away all your provisions, and they do that. And there's no water ahead, so they all meet with disaster and are eaten up by the yaka. But the second caravan leader, after some time has passed, he also pursues the same road, And when this yaka comes, he is clever and he tells his people, listen, we don't know this fella. He tells us to throw things away, but we are not going to do that. And in that way they are safe and they pass safely through the desert. And the other example, the idea of this parable is just to show how foolishness leads us to disaster. And the other parable describes two gamblers. They are playing on dice. The simile can only be understood when we have a little idea of dice game in ancient India, so that is a little different from what we nowadays understand under dice. What they apparently had was not marked dice like we have it now with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on each side or something like that. They were unmarked dice, so you may imagine something like chickpeas or peas. Considerable amount of these dice are there, and then a certain number of them is thrown into a particular area, and now the task of the other players is that they have to add to this number that is there another number so that the whole makes up an auspicious total number. So, I mean, I don't remember exactly what the auspicious numbers are, but let me just give an example. Say the first throw has thrown 17 of these dice. Then my job would be to very quickly be able to see 17, and then realize, okay, if I want to get the auspicious number of 33, I have to add another 16 and grab another 16 and throw them there. Just to give you an idea of the game. And good gamblers, there's, I think, somewhere it's not in the Buddhist scriptures, there's the example of a very good gambler who at one glance is able to count all the leaves on a tree. It just gives you this idea of somebody who at one glance immediately knows how much is there, and then he knows how much to add. And the way of cheating in this type of gambling is obviously when you have thrown one too much or one, then you have to let that disappear. So that, say, in my example, I said 17 and I add 16 and then I get, am I right, 33? And 33 is an auspicious number. So if I also throw 17 out of quickness wanting to get there and I got one more and then I got 34 and this is a total loss, then I can have one disappear and turn an unlucky throw, a Kali throw, a black throw, into a lucky throw. And this is in this example what one of the gamblers is doing, and he swallows the dice. So they are playing and he somehow realizes he has put one too much and he swallows it to make it disappear. And the other notices that and gets angry and says, okay, let's play tomorrow again. And the next day when they play, before he smears the dice with poison. And as they play and the other cheats and starts to swallow the poison, our other gambler then pokes fun at him in a verse and says, you don't know what you're swallowing. These two parables have again become Jatakas, stories of the past life of the Buddha. I'm giving you here the references under number 2. And as you might already imagine, the second case is not unproblematic because one of the gamblers is a cheater and the other one poisons his opponent. So the Jataka collection then chooses the second player, the one who poisons his opponent, to identify as a past life of the Buddha. And it solves the problem by reporting that yes, he did poison his opponent, but afterwards he gave him a medicine that cured him again. The third tale excuse me, I have for you is from the Pāli Vinaya. There's a story, the background story is that there's a group of notoriously misbehaving monks, and so they come to a place and they immediately occupy all buildings, so much that elder monks have no place to stay. And the Buddha next day convenes all the monks and says, look, you have to respect elders. And then he gives the example, one of three animals that live together, a bird, a monkey, and an elephant. And they live together, and they find out that for us to live together in harmony, we have to respect the one of us who is older than the others. And they find out by saying, look, there's some tree over there, and the elephant says, look, when I was very small, very young, the branches of this tree just reached up to my shoulders. And the monkey says, that's nothing. You know, when I was young, I could just eat the top leaves of this tree without having to climb up, so it was just up to my level. And then the bird says, look, friends, some time ago I ate a fruit of this tree and I voided on this place, and the seed of what I voided has become this tree. So they all realize that the bird is the eldest of them and decide that from now on we shall honor this bird. Now we have, this tale has become a Jataka in the Pāli Jataka collection and also in 3 Vinayas. I just give you their names, Mahasangika, the Mula Savastivada and the Savastivada. But other Vinayas, the Pāli Vinaya, the Dhammaguptaka and the Mahishasaka do not identify any of these animals as the Bodhisattva. And then we also have some differences because several Vinayas said that those who identify say that the Buddha was the bird, but the Mahasangika Vinaya actually says he has been the elephant instead. Then there's another Vinaya instance. Now this time the topic is contentment. The story goes that the monks had been asking the local population for this and that so much that as soon as people just saw a monk, they run around the corner and hide. And the Buddha wants to teach these monks a lesson about contentment and gives them the story of a rishi, an ancient Indian hermit sage, who was visited by a naga. This is a serpent king. And this naga wears a magical jewel around his neck. And so one day the rishi asks for that jewel. And that's too much, and the naga disappears and never comes back. Again, in the Theravada Vinaya, this is a parable, and this is also in the Mahasangika and Mula Savastivada Vinaya. But in the Pāli Jataka collection, this has become a past life of the Buddha, and the same also in another 2 Vinayas. Yeah, I see I'm running a little bit short of time. Yeah, I think I do a little longer today. There's 2 more stories and I like to finish them. If you have patience with me, 3-4 minutes more, I hope that's okay. I normally like to finish punctually. The 5th case I have is on patience. There are some monks who are in bitter fight for some minor matter, and the Buddha gives them the tale of a past king. The king Brahmadatta of one place called Benares has killed another king of Kosala and usurped his country. And so the son of this killed king enrolls in the service of the killing king and wants to get revenge. But after he has made himself have the king confidence in him, at last he gets a chance to carry out his plan to kill the king in revenge, but at the moment he's able to do that, he decides that that's the wrong course of action. His father, on passing away, had told him, you can never deal with anger by reacting with anger. It is only forgiveness that will lead out of anger. And so he decides to spare him. And the Buddha then says, look, even kings in ancient times spare each other. So you are all monks, you should also not react to anger with anger. So in the Theravada Vinaya, this is just a parable or a story. The same is for Madhyama-āgama and Ekotarika-āgama discourse. But in the Pāli Jataka collection, the prince who did not take revenge, is identified as a past life of the Buddha. And in a Chinese Jataka collection, however, it is the father of the prince who is said to be the Buddha in a past life. The prince was Ananda, the attendant of the Buddha. And the last example I have is from the Kutta-danta-sutta. This, excuse me, describes Brahmin who gets instructions on sacrifice from the Buddha. This situation, which in itself is already a little funny. Brahmins were the specialists on sacrifice, and the Buddha comes from a Kshatriya family. And the Buddha tells him, look, in the past there was a king who wanted to conduct a sacrifice, and he tells that to his Brahmin priest, and the Brahmin says, look, better you give to those in the country who cultivate or engage in trade, then people will live in prosperity. If we know the situation in ancient India, we know this is tongue-in-cheek. A Brahmin would, according to the way they are presented in the text, that would have been the last thing he would have done, and would have been very happy to get into a sacrifice instead of telling the king he should give to the poor and needy in the country. Then we get the description of the sacrifice. No killing whatsoever at the sacrifice. This is another poking fun at ancient Indian sacrifice where a lot of killing was done. Nobody is forced to do work with blows or threatening. This is also poking fun. But it still gets better. Then the king is doing his sacrifice, and then the other well-to-do people in the country come and says, sir, you're making a sacrifice. May we give you some of our own wealth for that? At this point, I think the people in ancient India who hear this story, they must have been rolling on the ground in laughter, because as far as we know, the very obvious opposite was happening, in that the king was trying to get wealth from others for his sacrifice instead of getting it offered. And in our story, the king then says, no, I don't need, I have enough of my own. No need for your wealth, you just keep it. So this whole story is very obviously, it has very obvious farcical traits. It's poking fun at ancient Indian sacrifice and what was normally happening in these situations. And the discourse continues in telling us, after the Buddha has told this story, a Brahmin that is in the audience who had asked about sacrifice, he says, but strange that the Buddha does not say he has heard of this. I wonder if he has witnessed it himself. And the Buddha says, yes, that is indeed the case. I witnessed it in the past. So this tale is significant in two respects. One is it gives a canonical sanction to the reasoning that when the Buddha tells us a tale from the past, without explicitly saying, I heard it somewhere, then it should be assumed that he remembers it from his recollection of past lives. And the other thing is that the Kutta-danta-sutta, the Pāli version, explains that the Buddha was this Brahmin chaplain in the past. The Chinese version says instead that he was the king. And the Sanskrit fragment version says he was both. Impossible. So we find that a number of stories I have shown to you, the identification of certain persons in what seems to be a parallel or a tale as a past life of the Buddha is not supported by parallel versions, and at times also does not really fit the context. So my conclusion is that with several Jatakas, canonical Jatakas, stories found in the Discourse and the Vinaya, the fact that these are reckoned as past birth of the Buddha is a later development. And I think the same would also apply to our tale of Sunetta. Yeah, I have to stop at this point. I have overtaxed you for 4 minutes. Almost 5 minutes today, I'm sorry, but I wanted to finish my Jataka excursion, on which we will be getting some opportunity to discuss the next lecture. And there's one last thing I just wanted to say. I think I forgot to mention that at the outset. I am now also posting notes, the notes of the lectures on the website. I am taking out all the copyright material, all the actual discourse translation, which I think I said we cannot put up freely. But I'm just putting like this listing of Jatakas will from tomorrow on will be found on the webpage also. So for all those of you who like to look at things again when you discuss things on the blog, or for those who listen to the lecture only the audio version, not able to see the video, it's possible to have that information there. Yeah, that's all for today. Thank you very much to all of you for your attention. I hope I have said something of some interest to you, and I wish you a good time until we meet next week. Bye.